Some great national teams won the World Cup. Some changed football without ever lifting it. Here are the 10 best men's national teams that never became world champions. At number 10, Morocco are here for the size of the breakthrough, not for a century of near misses. Before 2022, no African men's team had ever gone beyond the World Cup quarterfinals. Morocco smashed that ceiling with a team that knew exactly what it was. They defended tight, ran for everything, stayed calm under pressure, and attacked fast when the space opened up. It was not flashy all the time, but it was smart, hard, and brutally effective over a full tournament. That campaign felt organized from the first whistle to the last, and that kind of clarity is rare on a stage this big. The run itself was huge. Morocco topped a group with Croatia and Belgium, then knocked out Spain and Portugal to become the first African side ever to reach a World Cup semi-final. That matters in football history, not just African football history. They also did it while carrying the emotion of a region and a continent that had waited decades for a team to break through. They do not have a final, and they do not have decades of deep World Cup runs like some teams above them, so number 10 feels fair. But for one tournament, Morocco changed the ceiling. At number 9, Mexico. Few national teams carry this much football culture and this much World Cup habit without ever making the final jump. Mexico have been a constant presence for generations. They are technical, emotional, noisy, brave, and usually awkward for bigger names to face. The problem is simple. They have almost always stopped right before the really elite part of World Cup history begins. That gap between respect and true greatness is exactly why they land here. You always feel Mexico belong at the tournament. You just never got the sense that the trophy was truly within reach. What sums Mexico up is that long run of round of 16 appearances from 1994 to 2018. That streak showed consistency, but it also became a wall they could not break. Even with the pressure of Azteca behind them and a fan base that treats football like religion, the real breakthrough never came. Their two quarter-final runs, in 1970 and 1986, both came on home soil, which only adds to the feeling that the away breakthrough stayed out of reach. With all due respect to teams with one surprise semifinal, Mexico deserved this spot because they have mattered for a very long time. They just never got the World Cup moment their stature promised. At number 8, Poland. This is not just nostalgia. Poland were seriously good, especially in the 1970s and early 1980s, and they had results to prove it. They won World Cup bronze in 1974 and again in 1982, and they had players who could stand next to almost anyone of that era. Grzegorz Lato, Kazimierz Dana, and later Zbigniew Boniek gave Poland quality, intelligence, and real personality. For a while, they were not guests at the top table. They belonged there. They were capable of playing brave attacking football, but they also had enough steel to survive proper tournament pressure. The 1974 tournament still says a lot. Lato finished as the top scorer, Poland beat Brazil for third place, and the only team that stopped them was West Germany, who won the whole thing. That is not a nice little run. That is a team brushing right up against the biggest prize. 8 years later, they were back on the podium again, which shows the first run was no accident. They are below the top 7 because there was no final and no long era where Poland set the global standard. But on legacy and real World Cup weight, they absolutely belong in this list. At number 7, Turkey. They are not this high because of a long history of elite World Cups. They are here because their best peak was that strong. In 2002, Turkey looked like a team no favorite wanted to deal with. They were aggressive, powerful, emotional, and very clear about how they wanted to play. There was no confusion to them. You knew exactly what was coming, and it was still hard to stop. For one tournament, they looked like a proper giant killer with real substance behind it. They did not just ride momentum. They played with conviction and gave every game real edge. That run ended with bronze, and the key detail is this. The only team Turkey lost to was Brazil, and they lost to them twice. Hakan Şükür then scored after just 11 seconds in the third-place match, still the fastest goal in World Cup history. That gives the story even more bite. They also beat host Japan and then Senegal in extra time, so this was a run built on nerve as much as energy. Turkey cannot go much higher because the long-term record is not close to Sweden, Portugal, or the Netherlands. But at their best, they were far more than a one-week surprise. At number 6, Sweden. This might be the most underrated team on the list because Sweden's case is built on serious tournament strength across different eras. The obvious high point is the 1958 World Cup, when they reached the final on home soil and only lost to Brazil. But Sweden were never just about one summer. They kept showing up as a tough, organized, physically strong side that could get more out of a tournament than teams with bigger names and better headlines. They were the kind of national team nobody loved drawing, because they almost always made games uncomfortable and close. There is depth to the record as well. Sweden also finished third in 1950 and 1994, which tells you this was not a one-generation miracle. They knew how to survive big tournaments, how to manage pressure, and how to stay competitive without relying on superstar overload. The 1994 side, with Ravelli in goal and Brolin up front, reminded everyone how dangerous Sweden could be when the structure clicked. Compared with some of the teams below them, Sweden did this over much longer stretches of time. They may not have changed football, but they were one of the most reliable World Cup teams to never win it. At number 5, Belgium. This is where the list starts to hurt a little, because Belgium had a squad that looked good enough to win the whole thing. Courtois in goal, Kompany at the back, De Bruyne pulling strings, Hazard at his best, Lukaku up front. That is not a nice generation. That is a generation built to take a major trophy. For years, Belgium had world-class talent almost everywhere, and the expectation was obvious. Sooner or later, this team would get over the line. When people looked at that squad on paper, it felt less like hope and more like a deadline. The clearest World Cup case came in 2018. Belgium came back from 2-0 down against Japan, beat Brazil in the quarterfinal, and finished third after losing only to France. On quality, that team looked like champion material. That is exactly why they are so high and why the story still feels unfinished. Add in that long spell at number 1 in the FIFA rankings, and the gap between talent and silverware becomes even harder to ignore. Older Belgian sides deserve a mention too, but this golden generation is the real argument. Belgium were strong enough to become immortal. They just never completed the job. At number 4, Portugal. Few countries have produced this much football talent without turning it into a World Cup title. From Eusebio to Figo, from Rui Costa to Cristiano Ronaldo, Portugal have kept sending out players who could decide the biggest games. The strange part is that the perfect World Cup campaign never arrived. Sometimes the balance was off. Sometimes the depth was not there. Sometimes they ran into stronger teams at the wrong moment. But the talent level has been way too high for Portugal to be left out of the top 4. This is a country that has felt one complete month away from the trophy for decades. Their World Cup story has strong peaks without the final reward. Eusebio dragged Portugal to third place in 1966. The 2006 team reached the semifinals. And when Portugal finally won Euro 2016, it only made the lack of a World Cup look even more surprising. Even in tournaments where they fell short, they usually had at least one player who looked capable of changing the bracket on his own. Compared with Belgium, Portugal have a longer tradition of elite players and bigger moments across generations. They never found the flawless month, but they have spent decades looking like a country that should have one by now. At number 3, Hungary. This is one of the biggest what-ifs in football history. The great Hungary side of the 1950s were not just dominant. They were ahead of their time. With Ferenc Puskás, Sándor Kocsis, Nándor Hidegkúti, and the rest, they played with movement, combinations, freedom, and tactical ideas that pushed the game forward. They did not only beat teams. They made other teams look old. That is why Hungary are more than a strong runner-up story. They are one of the most important national teams ever. When people talk about football revolutions, Hungary have to be part of that conversation. There are two details you cannot ignore. In 1953, they beat England 6-3 at Wembley, a result that shook the football world. Then they arrived at the 1954 World Cup as overwhelming favorites and still somehow lost the final to West Germany in the miracle of Bern. That defeat is why this team feels tragic instead of complete. They had gone into that tournament on a huge unbeaten run, so the final never really fit the script. With all due respect to Croatia's results, Hungary had a bigger effect on football itself. If they win that final, we talk about them completely differently. At number 2, Croatia. For a country of that size, these World Cup results are ridiculous. Bronze in 1998. Finalists in 2018. Bronze again in 2022. That is not a one-off, that is a pattern. Croatia keep producing teams that are mentally stronger than the limits that should hold them back. They do not always have the deepest squad or the biggest talent pool, but they almost always have composure, technical quality, and a cold edge in the biggest moments. That is why they are so high. Very few national teams have squeezed this much World Cup value out of a relatively small player base. The strongest symbol of this is the Luka Modric era. In 2018, Croatia beat Denmark, Russia, and England on the way to the final, then came back in 2022 and reached the semi-finals again. Very few non-champions can match that repeatability. The 1998 side with Davor Šuker had already shown the same fearlessness 2 decades earlier, so this is bigger than one golden generation. Compared with Belgium or Portugal, Croatia have done more with less, and that matters. They are not number 1 because the Netherlands changed football in a way Croatia never did. But on pure World Cup efficiency, Croatia are almost unmatched. At number 1, the Netherlands. This is the clearest choice on the whole list. 3 lost World Cup finals already put them in the conversation, but the real reason they are first is bigger than that. The Netherlands did not just produce great teams. They helped change how football was played and understood. Rinus Michels and Johan Cruyff turned total football into one of the sport's biggest ideas, and Dutch teams kept sending that influence through generation after generation. This is not only about losing finals. It is about shaping the game while still somehow missing the one trophy that should have completed the picture. Just look at the names and the moments. Cruyff and the 1974 side. Another final in 1978. Van Basten, Gullit, and Rijkaard carrying Dutch excellence into the next era. Then the 2010 team came within one match of ending the whole debate. Later sides with Sneijder, Robben, and Van Persie kept the standard high even without finishing the job. No other team without a World Cup combines this many finals, this much talent, and this much influence on the sport itself. That is the paradox of the Netherlands. They gave football almost everything except the trophy that should have been theirs. So that is the list. From Morocco's historic breakthrough to the Dutch shaping football itself, these are the best men's national teams that got close, changed eras, and still somehow never lifted the World Cup. Now tell me your order. Which team is too high, which team is too low, and who should be in the top 10 instead? Drop your list in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, hit like, subscribe, and stick around for more football rankings every single week.